You ever wake up before the sun and feel like the world depends on you showing up? That was my life for 20 years. Every morning at 4:45 a.m. the alarm would growl, and before my wife could even turn over, I'd be on my feet. Same steel-toed boots, same lunchbox, same quiet prayer whispered under my breath. Lord, just get me through another day. The house was always still at that hour. The only sound came from the old coffee maker sputtering in the kitchen and the ticking clock above the fridge that somehow always ran 5 minutes slow. I used to stand there staring at that clock, sipping bitter coffee, telling myself those minutes were a gift, a few extra moments before the day started owning me again. By the time I got to the factory, the air already smelled of oil and metal. The machines groaned like tired giants waking up. I'd tie my gloves, wipe my brow, and dive into the noise. 12-hour shifts, sometimes more. Most guys complained. I didn't. I told myself, this is what a man does. He works, he provides, he keeps his family standing, even when his own knees are shaking. Every payday I'd fold my check neatly, hand it to Lillian, and say, take care of the bills first. She'd nod without looking up. Then I'd smile at the kids, pretending my back didn't hurt, pretending I wasn't afraid of running out of strength before running out of years. I missed birthdays, missed ball games, missed dinners so many times that my chair at the table started gathering dust. But I told myself it was worth it. Every overtime shift, every holiday spent at the plant, I thought I was buying my family a better life, and for a long time it looked like it was working. The mortgage got paid. The kids had new sneakers each school year. We even took a weekend trip once. Myrtle Beach, nothing fancy, just sand, laughter, and sunburns. I remember standing by the water watching them splash around and thinking, this is why I do it. That moment burned itself into my mind, the good kind of tired, the proud kind. But somewhere along the way, I started disappearing inside my own routine. The laughter at home got quieter. Lillian stopped asking how my day was. She already knew the answer. Same as yesterday. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the rearview mirror on the drive home and hardly recognize myself. The lines on my face looked older than my age. The spark in my eyes gone. Yet I kept going, because men like me don't know how to stop. Stopping feels like failure. At the plant, they called me old reliable. If someone's machine jammed, they called me. If someone got hurt, I was the one carrying them to the nurse's office. I took pride in that, being the guy everyone trusted. But pride has a funny way of turning into blindness. I didn't see the changes creeping in. New faces in the office, suits whispering in corners, clipboards with too many numbers. Still, I told myself, they wouldn't let me go. Not after 20 years. I'd earned my place here. When the whistle blew at the end of each shift, I'd clock out and drive home through the same cracked roads, headlights reflecting off rain-soaked asphalt. I'd think about how quiet the house would be when I walked in, how I'd set my boots by the door and hear the soft echo of a man doing his best, and even though no one said it, I believed my family was proud of me, because that's what kept me going. The thought that somewhere behind those silent dinners and tired smiles, they understood. I didn't know it yet. But the world I'd built around them was about to crumble in a single afternoon. It started like any other Friday. The air was heavy with that end-of-the-week fatigue everyone wore on their faces. I remember thinking how quiet the factory felt, as if the machines themselves were holding their breath. My supervisor, Doug, called me into the office around 10. He'd never called me in before. He usually hollered across the floor if he needed something fixed. When I stepped inside, he wouldn't meet my eyes. The blinds were drawn, and there was a man in a gray suit I'd never seen before, tapping a pen against a folder. Doug's voice came out soft, too soft. Ray, they're cutting positions. It's not about your work, you've been one of the best. But corporate's moving operations overseas. Your department's being dissolved. For a moment I didn't understand. My hands were still stained with grease, and I kept staring at the folder on the desk, waiting for him to laugh and say it was some mix-up. But he slid the paper toward me instead. Severance details, final check, health insurance ending in 30 days. That's how 20 years of mornings, 20 years of sweat and back pain, turned into 4 pieces of paper and a forced handshake. I walked out to the parking lot in slow motion. The sky looked too bright, the air too clean. A few of the younger guys nodded at me but didn't say anything. Nobody wanted to look at what might be waiting for them next. In the car, I turned the key and just sat there. The steering wheel felt hot under my palms. I thought about calling Lillian, but what would I say? Hey honey, remember that man who's been breaking his back to keep this family afloat? He's useless now. Instead, I drove home in silence. The house looked the same, neatly trimmed yard, kids' bikes thrown on the lawn. But when I stepped inside, something felt off. Lillian was folding laundry in the living room. She looked up, saw my face, and froze halfway through a fold. "What happened?" she asked. I told her. Every word tasted like dust. She stared for a moment, then sighed, long and slow. "So what are we supposed to do now, Raymond? Not we'll figure it out. Not you've done enough, take a breath." Just that flat question. Like a math problem she didn't feel like solving. I wanted to say 1,000 things, but all that came out was, "I'll find something." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the small, polite breaths of the woman who used to laugh in her sleep. The clock glowed 2:47 a.m., and I stared at the ceiling, counting the years I'd traded for security that vanished in one meeting. The next weeks blurred together. I applied everywhere: factories, warehouses, delivery jobs. Nobody was hiring a 48-year-old man with calloused hands and no degree. I stood in line at job fairs next to kids who looked barely old enough to shave, holding resumes printed on thick paper that smelled of fresh ink. At home, the distance grew. Lillian's patience thinned into silence. The kids stopped asking when I'd be back at work. My son Marcus started calling me sir instead of dad. My daughter Faith kept her headphones in during dinner. I'd talk about my day, and they'd scroll through their phones, nodding at the right moments but not really hearing me. One night I overheard them whispering. Faith said, "Mom, why's Dad always home now?" And Lillian whispered back, "Because he's figuring things out." But her tone carried that quiet disappointment that stings more than shouting. I tried to make myself useful, fixed the porch railing, repainted the kitchen, changed the car oil. But instead of gratitude, I saw irritation flicker across Lillian's face. Maybe my presence reminded her of everything we were losing. Bills started stacking up. I sold my tools, then my old guitar, then the fishing rods Dad gave me before he passed. Each item left a small hollow behind. My brother Dennis called once. "Man, you still out of work? You gotta move on, Ray. Can't sit around forever." I reminded him I'd covered his rent 2 years back when he was laid off. He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, well, things change. You were the golden boy back then." Then the line went quiet. Days melted into weeks. The calendar turned pages I didn't remember flipping. Sometimes I'd drive to the old factory gate and park across the street, watching the smoke rise from the vents. New workers went in, faces I didn't recognize. It felt like watching someone else live my life. One afternoon, I stopped at the grocery store. The cashier, a kid with tattoos and a lip ring, called me sir in that tone people use when they pity you. My card declined. Behind me, someone sighed loudly. I left the groceries there and walked out, sat in the truck until the sun went down. That was my lowest point. Not the job loss, not the bills, but that quiet humiliation of realizing nobody saw me as the man I used to be. The nights got colder. Lillian started sleeping facing the wall. The distance between us became a canyon I didn't know how to cross. Then one morning, after another sleepless night, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back looked like a stranger, gray at the temples, eyes dull, shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the provider, the fixer, the reliable one. I whispered to my reflection, "Who are you now?" No answer came, just the sound of the leaky faucet dripping into the sink, counting the seconds I'd been standing still. That was the day something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small internal shift. I realized nobody was coming to save me. Not the company, not my family, not even luck. If I wanted to climb out of this hole, I'd have to build the ladder myself. And as strange as it sounds, that thought, lonely, heavy, terrifying, was the first real piece of freedom I'd felt in years. They say a man never forgets the day his world falls apart. For me, it was a Thursday. A regular, ordinary Thursday. The kind of day you don't expect to remember. I woke up before dawn like I'd done for 20 years, made my coffee, kissed my wife's forehead while she pretended to still be asleep, and drove to work listening to the same old blues station. I had no idea that by sunset, everything I thought I'd built, every hour, every sacrifice, every dream, would come crashing down so quietly that it didn't even make a sound. You see, I wasn't the type of man who skipped work or complained. I showed up even when my body ached, even when I was sick. I was proud of that, proud of being dependable. In my mind, that's what made a man worth something: his word, his work, and the people who depended on him. But that morning, when I walked into the factory, something felt off. The hallways were quieter than usual. No hum of machines, no smell of hot metal, just silence. Then I saw a few guys standing around, whispering. Their faces looked strange, like they'd seen something I hadn't yet. When I reached my locker, I found an envelope taped to it, my name, in bold, and my stomach dropped. Inside were 3 papers, a termination letter, a severance agreement, and a thank you note. 20 years, gone in a paragraph and a signature. No warning, no conversation, no chance to prove myself, just downsizing. The plant manager, a man I'd trained myself 15 years back, couldn't even look me in the eye. He kept saying, "It's not personal, Ray. You've been one of the good ones." But it was personal. How could it not be? My hands had built half the machines in that place. My sweat was in those walls. And now I was just a name on a list. I remember walking out into the cold that morning, clutching that brown envelope like it was the last piece of my dignity. I sat in my truck for nearly 2 hours, watching men I'd worked beside for decades walk past without saying a word, as if losing your job was contagious. When I finally drove home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept rehearsing what I'd say to my wife, Denise. Maybe she'd hold my hand, tell me it's just a setback. Maybe the kids would hug me, tell me it's okay. I walked through that front door, still in my work uniform, and said, "Baby, I need to tell you something." She turned from the sink, looked at me, and frowned like she already knew. "What happened?" she asked. "I lost my job. They said they're cutting people. I'm one of them." She went silent for a moment, then turned back to the dishes and said softly, "So what are we supposed to do now? Not are you okay? Not we'll get through this. Just what are we supposed to do now?" And right there, standing in that kitchen I'd worked half my life to pay for, I felt something in me break. You never really expect the people you love to see you differently. But over the next few weeks, that's exactly what happened. At first, Denise tried to hide it, the polite tone, the shorter answers, the quiet sighs whenever she had to cover a bill. Then came the little jabs. "Maybe if you'd gone back to school like my brother said, or you should have saved more when things were good." My kids, they were 17 and 20 then, stopped asking me for advice, stopped including me in their conversations. It was like overnight, I'd gone from being their father to just another man sitting in the living room. I tried to act strong, told everyone I was fine, that I'd find something soon. But finding work at 48, after 2 decades in the same place, isn't as simple as people make it sound. Every interview ended the same. Polite smiles, firm handshakes, empty promises. "We'll be in touch." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The savings ran thin, the nights got longer. I'd lie awake next to Denise, staring at the ceiling, pretending to be asleep, listening to her sigh. Sometimes she'd whisper on the phone to her sister late at night, thinking I couldn't hear her, talking about how Raymond's not the same anymore, and maybe she was right, because I wasn't. I started to see myself through their eyes, not as the man who worked 20 years to give them everything, but as the man who failed to hold it together. I remember one night, my brother Leon stopped by. He'd heard about my situation. He looked around, saw the unopened bills on the table, the worry on my wife's face, and he just shook his head. "Man, you were always too proud," he said. "You thought working hard would be enough. It's not. Life doesn't care how good a man you were. It only cares what you still got." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to. But when he left that night, something inside me started to burn, because I realized they all thought I was finished. My wife, my kids, my brother, even my neighbors. I wasn't just jobless. I was invisible. And the worst part, they weren't entirely wrong. After I lost the job, time started moving differently. Days felt longer, heavier. Mornings didn't have purpose anymore. I used to wake up before the alarm. Now I stayed in bed long after it went off. I'd tell Denise I was just thinking, but truth was, I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. When you've spent your whole life waking up to a purpose, losing it feels like forgetting how to breathe. I kept replaying everything in my head, all the years I worked double shifts, all the birthdays I missed, all the promises I made to give my family the kind of life I never had. And now, it all felt like nothing. At first, I tried to keep busy. I'd fix little things around the house, clean out the shed, mow the lawn even when it didn't need mowing. But no matter what I did, the air inside that house felt colder every day. Denise stopped laughing. The kids stopped talking. Everyone just drifted. I noticed it most at dinner. We used to sit together, talk about school, work, plans for the weekend. Now half the time they ate in their rooms. And when they did sit with me, the conversation never lasted more than a few minutes. They'd talk to each other, not to me. I was there, but I wasn't there. I tried to start small conversations like I always used to. Asked Aaron how school was going. He just said fine. Asked Melissa if she was still seeing that boy from her class. She nodded without looking up from her phone. Denise sat across the table, scrolling through her tablet, pretending not to see the way my hands were shaking as I picked at my food. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you can tell they were just talking about you? I started feeling that in my own home. Not once or twice every day. I'd walk in and see the kids lower their voices, Denise switching tabs on her screen. They said it was nothing, but silence tells you more than words ever will. One night, I walked into the living room and heard Denise talking on the phone to her sister. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I froze when I heard her say, "He just sits around now. I can't keep pretending it's okay." That one sentence hit harder than any layoff notice ever could. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to tell her I heard, but I didn't. I just stood there, listening to my own wife talk about me like I was some burden she couldn't shake off. Later that night, when she came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped under the covers quietly, careful not to touch me. And in that darkness, I realized something I never thought I'd feel. My own home didn't feel like mine anymore. A few weeks later, the bills started piling up. The severance money was running thin. I sold my truck first, that old Ford I'd saved years to buy, then the tools I didn't need anymore. I told myself it was temporary, that things would turn around soon, but nothing did. Denise started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, which I respected. She worked hard, but she also started staying late, coming home quiet, avoiding my eyes. She'd sit on the edge of the bed at night scrolling through her phone, and I'd lie there pretending not to wonder who she was texting. One day, my brother Leon dropped by again. He didn't come to check on me. Not really. He came to brag, talked about how his business was doing, how his wife just got a promotion. I smiled through it, tried to be polite, but I could tell what he really came for, to remind me that I wasn't the man I used to be. At some point, he looked around the house and said, "You used to have so much fire, Ray. Don't let life turn you into one of those bitter men who just sit around blaming the world." I just nodded, even though every word cut deep, because what I wanted to tell him was that I wasn't blaming the world. I was blaming myself. I'd built my whole identity around being the provider, the man who could take care of his family no matter what. And when that was gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. Weeks turned into months. The house got quieter. The distance between me and Denise grew into something neither of us wanted to talk about. Then one evening, I walked into the living room and found her packing a small overnight bag. She said she was going to stay with her sister for a while, just to clear her head. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that we could fix it, that things would get better, but I didn't. I just stood there watching her zip that bag shut. Before she left, she looked at me and said softly, "You're not the man you used to be, Ray." And that right there, shattered something inside me, because I realized she wasn't wrong. I wasn't the same man. I was smaller, quieter, broken in ways she couldn't understand. That night, after she left, I sat in the dark living room staring at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces, happy vacations, all those moments I thought would last forever. And for the first time in my life, I cried. Not the kind of cry where you wipe your face and move on, the kind that shakes your whole body, the kind that makes you question every choice you've ever made. I cried because I'd given my life to building a family that no longer saw me. I cried because I realized how easy it is to go from being everything to being nothing. After that night, I stopped pretending, stopped smiling when people asked how I was, stopped pretending I had a plan. Days went by in silence. The mail kept coming. Bills, overdue notices, rejection letters. I stopped checking them. Then one afternoon I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. My beard was grayer. My eyes looked tired. I used to have this spark. Now it was just gone. That's when I knew something had to change. Not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because if I didn't do something soon, I'd lose the little pieces of myself I still had left. So the next morning, I got up, shaved, and wrote a list on an old notepad. At the top I wrote, "Start over." I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like that. You know, when you've worked your whole life building something, you never think it'll crumble quietly. You expect noise, maybe a warning, maybe a shout, but mine didn't come with any of that. It came with silence. I remember that morning clear as glass. The factory floor smelled like oil and hot metal, same as it had for 20 years. The machines groaned like old men, and the air had that heavy hum, the one that fills your ears until it feels like part of you. I clocked in, nodded to the guys, and grabbed my wrench. Same as every day. Then, around noon, the plant manager walked in with two men in suits. Suits don't belong on factory floors. Everyone knew that. We all stopped what we were doing, just for a second, and when his eyes met mine, I felt it, that strange hollow knowing before words even catch up. He said my name. "Raymond, can I see you for a moment?" And suddenly 20 years of my life started to weigh heavier than my tool belt. I followed him into the little office near the back, the one with the flickering light and coffee stains on the desk. I still remember how his lips moved, but I swear I didn't hear half of what he said. Budget cuts, restructuring, not personal, not personal. How do you tell a man losing his job ain't personal when his whole life is built around it? When his kids' school fees come from those hours? When his wife's grocery lists depend on those overtime shifts? When his pride is that job? I didn't say a word. I just nodded, picked up my toolbox and walked out. That was the longest walk of my life. Every man I passed lowered his eyes, not out of disrespect, but out of fear, because they knew what it meant. They knew that could be them next. When I got home, the house was quiet, too quiet. My wife, Denise, was sitting by the kitchen window, scrolling through her phone. I told her what happened, and she froze. No tears, no questions, just this long silence that filled every corner of the room. Then she finally said, "We'll figure something out." But her tone, it wasn't comforting. It was cautious, like she was already stepping back, testing the distance between us. The kids came in later that evening. I tried to sound normal, crack a joke at dinner like I always did, but they barely looked up from their screens. My oldest, Marcus, said, "So what are you going to do now?" And I laughed, but deep down, that question burned, because the truth was, I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I didn't have an answer. Days turned into weeks. I started waking up early out of habit, but instead of heading to the factory, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the street, watching other men drive to work, watching the world keep moving like I was never part of it. I tried everything, applications, calls, even visiting old supervisors, but everywhere I went, it was the same look. "You're a great worker, Ray, but we just don't have space right now." Translation: "You're too old, too expensive, too much history." Denise started staying out later, said she was working extra hours, and maybe she was. I never accused her, but there's a difference between not knowing and pretending not to know. I could feel her slipping away, little by little. The woman who once told me I was her rock now walked past me like a shadow. I began to hate nights. That's when the noise in my head got loudest. All those sacrifices, the overtime shifts, the birthdays I missed, the promises I postponed, they came back like ghosts. And I kept thinking, maybe I gave too much to a world that didn't care. Maybe I gave too much of myself to a job that saw me as a replaceable part. Then came the day I overheard Denise talking on the phone. She didn't see me standing by the hallway. Her voice was low, almost whispering, but the words hit like a hammer. She said, "He's not the man he used to be." That one broke me. Not because it wasn't true, but because she said it like I was gone, like I had already been buried. After that, something in me changed. I stopped begging the world to understand me. I stopped explaining myself. I just went quiet, started selling off a few things from the garage, old tools, car parts, whatever I could find. I'd fix up neighbors' cars for a small fee, just to keep food on the table. But deep down, I knew I was starting over. Not rebuilding, starting over. Some nights, I'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling, thinking about every man who'd ever given everything for his family, only to end up forgotten the moment he stumbled. And I wondered how many of us were out there, sitting in dark rooms, trying to remember who we used to be before life stripped us down to nothing. But something inside me refused to stay broken. I didn't know it then, but that silence, that humiliation, was the spark. Because when life takes everything from you, it also gives you a choice. You either stay down, or you build again, with your bare hands if you have to. And I wasn't done building, not yet. You know what nobody tells you about losing everything? The first few weeks aren't the hardest. It's the weeks after. The weeks when the dust settles, and the house still stands, but nothing inside feels alive anymore. I'd wake up before sunrise every day, out of habit, expecting to hear the hum of factory machines in my head. But all I'd hear was silence, the kind that pressed down on you, heavy and patient, reminding you that the world had moved on without you. Denise started leaving earlier for work. She'd fix her hair in front of the hallway mirror, put on that same perfume she used to wear when we were dating, and for a few seconds I'd watch her, not as my wife, but as a stranger wearing the memories of someone I used to know. She'd say, "Don't wait up, I might be late," and I'd nod. I always nodded. What else was there to say? The house used to sound alive. Laughter, TV noise, the sound of forks hitting plates, kids yelling across rooms. Now it was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. Marcus stopped asking how I was. My daughter Joy barely came out of her room anymore. Everyone was living their own version of life, and mine had somehow been written out of the script. I spent my mornings walking, just walking, down the same cracked sidewalks, past the same corner store where I used to buy the kids' ice cream after long shifts. Sometimes I'd end up by the old factory gates. They'd padlocked them now, tall metal bars rusting under the sun. I'd stand there a few minutes, then walk away before someone saw me. One afternoon, I bumped into an old coworker, Daryl. He still had his job. Lucky him. He looked uncomfortable seeing me. You could tell he wanted to say something but didn't know what. Finally, he said, "Hang in there, Ray. You'll bounce back." I smiled. The kind of smile that hides 1,000 things you can't explain. Because deep down, I didn't even know what bounce back meant anymore. I started spending time in the garage. It was small, dusty, filled with boxes and old tools that hadn't been touched in months. But it was quiet and it was mine. Sometimes I'd sit there for hours, just tinkering, fixing a radio that didn't work, cleaning an old carburetor, patching up an engine that wasn't going anywhere. I didn't have clients yet. I wasn't even sure I was doing anything that mattered. But it felt like purpose, like breathing again. Money was tight, real tight. There were days we had rice and eggs for dinner, and even that felt like a blessing. Denise stopped leaving her paycheck on the counter like she used to. I had to ask now, quietly, cautiously, like a guest in my own home. And every time I asked, she'd sigh first, like she was already tired of me before I even spoke. One night, Marcus came home late, and I asked him where he'd been. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why do you care? You don't even work anymore." That one nearly broke me. I wanted to shout, to remind him of every bill I paid, every meal I sacrificed for, every sleepless night spent worrying about his future. But I didn't. I just stared at him, then walked back into the garage. Because I realized then, you can't force respect from people who've already decided you don't matter anymore. That same week, Denise told me maybe I should look into something else. Said maybe I was too old for factory work. And I thought about that word, old. Funny how it never meant anything when I was the one keeping the lights on. But now, suddenly, it was a label, a reason to be dismissed, a quiet way of saying, your time's up. Still, I couldn't just sit and rot. That's not who I am. So I started fixing cars for people around the neighborhood. At first it was just favors. Miss Johnson's old Toyota, the preacher's van, some kid's motorbike. They'd pay me a few dollars here and there. I wasn't making much, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something again. Word spread slowly. People started coming by the house, some out of pity, some out of genuine need. I didn't care which. Work was work. The sound of a wrench against metal, the smell of oil, it grounded me, reminded me of who I was before titles and paychecks defined me. But even then, nights were the hardest. When the house went quiet, and I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling again, wondering when things had shifted so far. I'd replay everything in my head, every argument, every silence, every look Denise gave me that used to mean love and now just meant patience running out. And I'll tell you something I've never told anyone. One night, I almost packed my things and left. I had a bag ready, wallet, toothbrush, 2 shirts, and the little money I'd saved. I stood by the door, staring into the dark street. But then I saw the picture on the wall, the one of me holding Joy when she was a baby, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk away from my family, even if they'd already walked away from me. So I stayed. I stayed and I worked. And slowly something started shifting, not outside, but inside me. I realized the version of me they were mourning, the man who always had answers, who always held it together. He was gone. And maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe I had to let him go to find who I really was underneath all that duty and silence. There's something humbling about rebuilding from scraps. It strips away your pride, your ego, all that noise. You start to see what really matters. By the end of that year, I'd saved up enough to buy a few proper tools and rent a tiny lot on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a patch of dirt with a tin roof. But it was mine. I painted a wooden board and nailed it to the front. Cole's Auto Repair. I stood there staring at that sign, hands greasy, shirt soaked with sweat, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I didn't tell Denise right away. Didn't make a big deal out of it. I just opened the doors and got to work. Some days were slow, others were busier than I could handle. But I didn't mind. Every turn of the wrench, every car that rolled out of that garage, it felt like redemption in motion. And little by little, people started talking. Not about the man who lost his job, but about the man who built something out of nothing. Funny thing is, the same people who once looked away when they saw me at the store started stopping by to say hello. They'd clap my shoulder, tell me I was doing good, and I'd smile, not out of pride but out of quiet satisfaction. Because they didn't know what it took to get there. But Denise, she still looked at me like I was a ghost of the man she married. Like no matter how hard I worked, it didn't count anymore. And I started to wonder if maybe my biggest mistake wasn't losing the job. Maybe it was expecting her to still see me when I changed. Still, I kept going. Because by then, I had learned something powerful. When no one believes in you anymore, you either break or you rebuild in silence until the noise of your comeback speaks for itself. And me? I wasn't done making noise. Not yet. You know, people like to say success smells sweet. But when you've crawled through the kind of dirt I did, it smells like oil, sweat, and second chances. That little garage of mine became my whole world. Every morning before the sun even showed its face, I'd be out there sweeping the dust, setting my tools in order like soldiers lined for duty. The sign out front, Cole's Auto Repair. It wasn't much, just wood and paint. But to me, it was more than a name. It was proof that I wasn't finished yet. At first, it was just a few cars a week. Old ones, beat-up things that people didn't think were worth saving. But that was the beauty of it. I knew what it felt like to be left for dead, and I refused to give up on anything that still had a little spark left in it. Some customers would linger, watching me work. They'd say things like, "Man, you don't talk much, do you?" And I'd just smile. Because I wasn't here to talk, I was here to rebuild. The neighborhood kids started hanging around too. I'd let them help wash cars, hand me wrenches. Some days, I'd pay them with cold sodas and advice I wished someone had given me when I was their age. Work with your hands, not your mouth, and don't expect anyone to clap for you while you're climbing. By the third month, word had spread farther than I expected. One afternoon, a man drove in with a Lexus. Clean, expensive, too polished for my side of town. He stepped out, looked around and said, "You the guy who fixed Reverend Mitchell's van?" I nodded. He smiled. "Then you're the man I've been hearing about." That's when I realized something. When you're consistent, even in silence, people talk. They just talk slower than they do when you fail. But not everyone was happy about it. Denise started questioning how much time I spent at the garage. She'd say, "You're never home anymore." And I'd think, "Now you notice." But I never said it out loud. I'd just wipe the grease off my hands and tell her I was trying to build something for us, for the family. She'd roll her eyes. "You've been building something for years, Raymond." I'm tired. That one stung. Because I realized we weren't even fighting about money anymore. We were fighting about who I used to be. She missed the man who brought in paychecks without getting his hands dirty. I was starting to miss him too, until I remembered how miserable he was trying to please everyone. Marcus had started college by then. He barely came home, and when he did, it was like visiting a stranger. He'd sit at the table, scrolling his phone, acting like he was in some waiting room he couldn't wait to leave. I wanted to talk to him, not as a father, but as a man. To tell him life isn't about titles or numbers in your account, that one day he'd understand what it means to be unseen. But the words always got stuck somewhere between my chest and my pride. Then came the day everything changed. A woman pulled up in a broken-down SUV, engine smoking, baby crying in the back seat. She looked exhausted, said she'd been turned away by 2 other shops because she couldn't pay the full repair fee up front. I looked at that car, then at her, and told her to leave it with me. "Pay me when you can," I said. She started crying, right there in front of me. Said no one had ever trusted her like that. Took me 2 days to fix it. When she came back, she tried to hand me half of what she owed, but I refused. Told her, "Bring me the rest when you're steady. Just get that baby home safe." She left smiling. A week later, she returned, not just with the rest of the money, but with her brother, her cousin, and 3 other people who all needed their cars fixed. That's how it started. One good deed that turned into a flood. Word got around there's a man at Cole's garage who fixes cars and treats people like people. Soon I had more cars than space. Sometimes I'd work till midnight, the light from my old lamp spilling out onto the gravel. My hands would ache, my back would scream, but I didn't care, because for the first time in years, I was proud to look at my reflection again. Grease-stained, tired, but alive. Denise didn't come around much. Even when I'd invite her to stop by, she'd make excuses, said it wasn't really her thing. I'd find out later she'd been spending time with a coworker, a man from her office who apparently understood her better. That truth came slow, like a wound reopening each time she came home later and later. I'll never forget the night I found out for sure. She left her phone on the couch and a message popped up, from him. Simple words, "Did you get home safe?" followed by a heart. My hands shook, but I didn't throw anything, didn't yell. I just sat there, staring at that message until the screen went dark. It wasn't anger I felt, it was silence. The kind that comes after a storm, when the damage is already done. That night I went out to the garage, sat on my workbench and just breathed. I could have confronted her right then, demanded answers, demanded the truth, but what would that change? I realized something painful. I had already lost her. Not that night, not even that year. I'd lost her slowly, over time, while I was too busy trying to prove myself to the world. So I did what I knew best. I worked, harder than ever. I stopped trying to fix people. I started fixing myself. By the next summer, business was booming. I hired 2 young men from the neighborhood, both out of work, both with stories that sounded too much like mine. Watching them reminded me how easily life can chew you up if you let it. One of them, Jamal, said something I'll never forget. He told me, "Mr. Cole, you give people hope just by showing up every day." And I laughed, but deep down, it hit me, because no one had ever said that to me before. One afternoon, I was under a car when I saw a pair of expensive heels stop beside me. I rolled out from under the chassis, wiped my hands, and there she was, Denise, looking around, her eyes darting from the tools to the men working, then finally settling on me. She said softly, "You've really turned this place around." I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to love, the woman who once believed in me when I had nothing. But something had changed. Not just in her, but in me. I said, yeah, it's not much, but it's honest. She looked down, maybe expecting me to say more. I didn't. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then just said, "You've done good, Raymond," and she left. That night, I sat outside the garage, watching the lights flicker across the sign, Cole's Auto Repair, and I realized for the first time, I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's. I thought back to every insult, every silence, every look that made me feel invisible, and it all melted into something else, gratitude. Because without that pain, I never would have found this peace. I once believed that love and family were the things that defined a man, but now I know it's what you do after they break you that truly shows who you are. When people see me now, they see a man who made it back, but the truth is, I never left. I just had to lose everything to remember who I was. And when I drive past my old house these days, the one where the laughter faded, the one where I once felt like a stranger, I don't feel anger anymore, just calm. Because I know something they don't. I built myself back piece by piece, and that's something no one can ever take from me again.